Ukraine has made doing the impossible an art form during its war against Russia. The country was never meant to withstand the sheer might of Russia's initial invasion, but it did. Even with military aid, Ukraine's defenses should have collapsed due to Russia's attritional strategy. But they haven't, and thanks to drones, Ukraine takes out tanks, artillery, air defense systems, and even assets inside Russia itself, none of which Russia could ever have thought possible back in February 2022. And now Ukraine has done the impossible again. Ukraine has just obliterated a roughly $10 million Russian gunship. And here's the kicker: Ukraine's weapon of choice costs $500, and Russia never saw it coming. On September 29, Euromaidan Press reported that the commander of Ukraine's Unmanned Systems forces had taken to Telegram to unveil footage of a strike that should have been impossible. Ukraine's 1st Battalion of the Kizaki Vysot, also known as the Predators of the Heights, has pulled off the attack. That battalion is part of Ukraine's 59th Separate Assault Brigade, and their strike managed to take out a big Russian asset, an Mi-8 helicopter. So, how did Ukraine manage to pull this off using a $500 weapon? The answer is coming in a moment, but before that, it's worth taking a closer look at the Mi-8 to understand why this gunship was such a high-profile target for Ukraine. Though the Mi-8 is called a gunship, that's only part of what it does. The Czech Republic's Ministry of Defense and Armed Forces reveals that Russian Mi-8s are designed to be multi-purpose, jacks of all trades when they're on the battlefield. Designed in the classic Russian style, meaning they feature a 5-blade main rotor and a 3-blade tail rotor, the Mi-8 is one of the world's most extensively used military choppers. It's one of the increasingly rare examples of Russia getting a lot of things right with one of its aerial platforms. Right now, Mi-8s are flown in 49 countries because they offer a level of versatility that's rarely seen in a helicopter. The Mi-8's primary purpose is transporting personnel, with which it's aided by what the Czech ministry calls excellent navigation and information systems that enable safe day and night flights even under the very adverse weather conditions. Some versions of the chopper even have a special hold for VIPs, indicating that the Mi-8 is Russia's chopper of choice when it wants to move important people around the battlefield. Granted, it's a Soviet-era helicopter, like so much of the equipment that Russia is fielding against Ukraine. But unlike the ancient tanks and towed artillery, Mi-8s are far from obsolete. They have a cruise speed of around 200 kilometers or about 124 miles per hour, and they're capable of carrying 24 people or up to 4,000 kilograms of cargo. That amounts to over 8,800 pounds, suggesting that this is a helicopter that was designed to do some very heavy lifting. But hold on a second. The Mi-8 was called a gunship earlier, yet it seems like a cargo chopper. It's actually both. As Odin highlights in its profile of the Mi-8, there are several ways that this helicopter can do a lot of damage if Russia chooses to use it that way. The most obvious method is by using the people stashed on board. The Mi-8 has several windows installed in its interior cabin through which soldiers can fire any number of personal weapons from its sides. A hail of machine gun fire can meet anybody who tries to interfere with this chopper's operations. But truthfully, that's the least of a potential target's concerns. The Mi-8 also has several wing-mounted weapons, and it's these that give the chopper its reputation of being just as effective as a gunship as it is as a cargo helicopter. Depending on how Russia wants to use the Mi-8, it can be loaded with a pair of 7.62mm machine guns or one 12.7mm gun. If the Mi-8 is intended to deal with targets on the ground, it can be loaded with up to 6 AT-2X or AT-3 anti-tank guided missiles. If explosive firepower is the goal, Russia can load up to 6 57mm rocket pods, each capable of carrying 16 rockets for a total of 96. Or the Mi-8 can be loaded with a pair of 80mm pods capable of carrying 20 rockets apiece if it needs to hit a little harder. And speaking of hitting hard, the chopper is also capable of dropping bombs. Russia's 250 and 500 kilogram bombs can be loaded onto an Mi-8, so can a pair of 23mm gun pods. Coming back to the rockets, Odin adds that Russia has choices here as well. Heat, anti-armor, smoke, incendiary, and high explosive fragmentation rounds can all be fired from this chopper. The point here is that despite its age, the Mi-8 is still a formidable adversary. When Russia isn't using it to transport troops, it can be loaded with so many weapons that it poses a threat to a range of ground targets. It's not the perfect weapon, of course. Mi-8 isn't going to be winning a battle with a fighter jet anytime soon. But even if it was just its cargo carrying abilities alone that Ukraine had to worry about, this bulky chopper would still be worth taking out of the skies for good. Which leads right back to what was promised earlier, how Ukraine took out Russia's Mi-8 on September 29. The Kyiv Post provides the basics, reporting that Ukraine managed to take out this terrifying Russian gunship with a weapon that is made famous during its battle against Russia. Yes, it was a first-person view or FPV drone that destroyed Russia's Mi-8. And this isn't speculation. It's not a case where a missile did the dirty work and Ukraine is claiming it was a drone. Ukraine has receipts in the form of footage shared by the commander of Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces mentioned earlier. That commander is named Robert Brovdi, though he goes by the nickname Madyar, and he shared the footage that proves Ukraine just took out a Russian gunship with a very cheap drone. Taking to Telegram, Madyar has shared 2 videos, the first of which shows the immediate aftermath of Ukraine's FPV drone strike on a chopper that Madyar initially thought was a Mi-28. That initial 30-second video appears to have been shot by another of Ukraine's drones, and it shows the Russian chopper exploding into a ball of flames after something hits it. Seeing what that something might be is difficult in the initial footage, as the Mi-8 turns into a smoking fireball before it hurtles to the ground after Ukraine's attack. So what, one might think? The video is impressive enough, but it's difficult to tell if Ukraine really used an FPV drone to take out Russia's Mi-8. Madyar must have agreed. In a second Telegram post, where Madyar corrected his initial post and confirmed that it was an Mi-8 that Ukraine took out, a full minute of footage shows a lot more what confirms how Ukraine carried out this strike. This time, the footage doesn't come from a different Ukrainian drone that's filming what happened to Russia's Mi-8. It comes from the drone that did the damage. Things are seen from the FPV drone's perspective as it hurtles through the air en route to its target. At about the 10-second mark, Russia's Mi-8 appears on the horizon. Within seconds, Ukraine's FPV drone is within touching distance. It pivots slightly to its right, allowing the drone to position itself right in the Mi-8's path. The gunship's pilot either didn't see the drone coming or was simply unable to react. It doesn't really matter. Ukraine's drone makes contact with the side of Russia's chopper and its screen goes blank. Detonation achieved, chopper down. The video then cuts back to the same footage shot from range that Madyar shared before. However, a little more is tacked onto the end of the 1-minute video. Another of Ukraine's drones arrives on the scene, allowing us to see the flaming wreckage of Russia's chopper on the ground. There can be no doubt at this point, Russia lost one of its most valuable helicopters thanks to a single Ukrainian FPV drone. That drone, Defense Blog says in its report on Ukraine's impossible strike, was a Shrike 10. Far from being the most impressive drone in Ukraine's ever-expanding arsenal of unmanned aerial vehicles, the Shrike 10 is so named because it's an FPV drone measuring just 10 inches that can be armed with a PG-7M warhead. While the drone itself may not be the first weapon one might think of for the job of taking out an Mi-8, that warhead packs enough of a punch to get the job done. It's a high-explosive anti-tank or heat rocket that's capable of destroying far heavier armor that's packed into the Mi-8. Ukraine repurposed this powerful rocket for the Shrike 10. September 29 proved just what it could do with an anti-tank rocket when taking on a gunship. Defense Blog adds that what Ukraine just pulled off is only the second confirmed instance of the country managing to take out an Mi-8 helicopter using an FPV drone. There are so few examples for a reason. FPV drones, which are remotely piloted using real-time video feeds, have become one of Ukraine's most effective tools for striking tanks, artillery, and logistic targets, Defense Blog says. However, using them against moving aerial targets remain extremely difficult due to high speeds, unpredictable flight paths, and limited engagement windows. That's evident in the footage described earlier. There are literal seconds between when Russia's Mi-8 appeared on the horizon and when Ukraine's drone scored its direct hit. The drone operator needed sharp eyes to spot the incoming Russian asset, and even sharper reflexes to get their drone into position so it could hit its target. This was a very rare strike, and it's not something that Ukraine can repeat all too often. But it managed it on September 29, and Ukraine did some serious damage with the strike. Beyond taking out the helicopter, Defense Blog reports, Ukraine also managed to kill some Russian personnel. The Mi-8's pilot wasn't one of them, apparently. Pro-Kremlin military bloggers have claimed that the Mi-8's entire crew was evacuated from the crash site and there were no casualties. That appears to have been a lie, at least according to Defense Blog. The outlet says that later reports indicate that the Russian gunship was carrying 5 people. 3 of those people are dead. The other 2 have sustained severe burns in the fireball that Ukraine's drone strike created and are now in critical condition. How has Russia reacted to all of this? It's tried to deny everything other than that Ukraine took out at Mi-8. The Voivoda broadcast Telegram channel shared the lie that all was well with the crew of the destroyed Mi-8. Everything's fine, the channel claimed. The infantry picked up the crew and evacuated them. Huge thanks to them for that. The channel added, and the Ukrainians screwed up with a type of helicopter. That was a legitimate error that has since been corrected. And as for the Mi-8's pilots, the pilots were great. They held the burning one down and landed it safely, the Voivoda broadcast says. Landed it safely? What's seen in Ukraine's footage doesn't seem like a safe landing. It looks like an Mi-8 hurtling to the ground while on fire. There isn't a landing to speak of, just a crash, and one that's likely killed or severely injured everybody on board. Mentioned earlier was that this isn't the first time that Ukraine has managed to take out Russian choppers while they're in flight. Back in August, the Kyiv Post reported that Ukraine managed to use some of its Darts FPV drones to score kills on both another Mi-8 and an Mi-28 during 2024. Again, video footage was released, and the results were devastating to Russia. The Mi-28 was carrying an assault team, according to the Kyiv Post. The team never made it to whatever attack it was supposed to be a part of in Kursk, which is where the strike happened. As for the Mi-8, Ukraine spotted it flying low and spent 10 minutes chasing it down. Ukraine's drone operators then predicted the gunship's flight path and sent a dart right into its tail. Perhaps the operators of the Shrike 10 did the same thing on September 29. However, there is a distinction between what Ukraine did in 2024 and what it achieved with its FPV drone in September. The Dart drones Ukraine used in its previous strike cost $1,000 each. That's still very low compared to the cost of a Mi-8. But in September, Ukraine halved its outlay, which means it doubled its return on investment. A Shrike 10 cost just $500 to build. An Mi-8 sets Russia back around $10 million. Ukraine's attack wasn't just as close to impossible as one can get, it was also extremely cost-effective. Ukraine managed to take out a gunship worth 20,000 times more than the weapon it used to conduct the strike. That's a fantastic return on investment in anybody's book, and it will make Ukraine's attack sting all the more for Russia. It can't console itself by thinking that Ukraine at least spent a missile that cost several $100,000 or even several $1 million to take out its Mi-8. Russia's chopper went down to about as basic an FPV drone as it's possible to find in the Ukraine war. A weapon that's been put together using barely any material decimated a chopper that was among the best that the Soviet Union ever made. That's not just painful for Russia, it's embarrassing. The Mi-8 can pack so much expensive firepower, yet all of it was useless against Ukraine's 10-inch drone. It's not even clear if this particular gunship had weapons. Even if it did, the pilot wouldn't have been able to fire them. Ukraine's drone was on the Mi-8 before Russia even realized what was happening. Russia paid the cost. If Defense Blog is right, it's not just a $10 million helicopter that Ukraine took out. Reports suggest there were 5 people on board, with 3 killed in action and 2 critically injured, though there's been no official confirmation yet. As callous as it may be to say, these are all expenses on top of the Mi-8 itself, for which Russia now has to account for, both monetarily and in terms of its attacks being weakened on the battlefield. And all of this leads to what this means for the Ukraine war. First, it's important to dial things back a little. As insanely impressive as this almost impossible strike was, it's not some sort of game changer in the war. While the exact location has not been disclosed, reports suggest the helicopter was downed in eastern Ukraine. So it's at least clear that Ukraine has taken out a troop transport that likely ferried Russia's soldiers around for assaults in a region that Putin covets. Beyond that, the destruction of a single Mi-8 likely isn't going to have too much of a direct impact on the Ukraine war. What it does show is that Russia is still incapable of dealing with the often ingenious and cost-effective techniques Ukraine uses to cause serious damage to its military. An outlay of $500 for a $10 million plus return is no small thing. Small and cheap threats lie at the heart of Ukraine's entire strategy against Russia, and Putin's troops still haven't come up with an answer for them. The simple fact is that expensive assets like helicopters shouldn't be getting taken down by drones, but they are. And Russia seems unable to do anything about it. The Economist highlighted this problem in a September 2024 article, where it examined the battle between Ukraine's drones and Russia's helicopters. It used the previously mentioned example of Ukraine using Dart FPV drones to take out a pair of Russian helicopters to make the point that this could, and perhaps should, be a tactic that Ukraine explores more. Of course, helicopter pilots have ways to protect themselves. The Economist said when discussing how Russia could solve the problem of losing multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment to cheap drones. Although the flares they use to distract heat-seeking missiles are useless against drones, attack craft can use their automatic cannon against them. If that fails, the pilot can use evasive maneuvers or a burst of speed to get away, although that might mean abandoning their mission. The thing is, the footage of the September 29 strike showed how little time Russia's Mi-8 pilot had to react. Burst of speed and onboard weapons aren't the answer. The latter in particular can't solve Russia's Ukrainian drone problem. None of the missiles and bombs that are part of a Mi-8's gunship loadout are much use against a $500 FPV drone. The chopper's machine guns could be that the chopper pilot needs fast reflexes to use those guns. And if Ukraine does lose a drone in an Mi-8 encounter, then so what? The drone costs $500. Another could be sent on its way in minutes, and another, and then another. An Mi-8 would have to destroy 20,000 of Ukraine's $500 drones before Ukraine would be forced to concede that the juice isn't worth the squeeze for a strike. That just isn't happening. Whenever Ukraine sends a drone to attack a helicopter, it basically has nothing to lose and everything to gain. A similar concept appeared during Ukraine's brilliant Operation Spiderweb. Though that operation had obvious cost in terms of the intelligence gathered to make it happen and the vehicles used to transport Ukraine's FPV drones to their required locations, the drones themselves were little quadcopter unmanned aerial vehicles. They were cheap and loaded with small bombs, and that was enough to take out some of Russia's most expensive bombers. As the Lowy Institute puts it, Ukraine's cheap robots extract a heavy price from Russia. And that's what was evident on September 29. This wasn't just Ukraine pulling off the impossible, it was Ukraine showing how asymmetric warfare conducted on a budget can be effective against a military that spends far more. Ukraine keeps coming up with new ways to hurt Russia. It's costing Russia millions, if not billions of dollars in the process. Perhaps that, more than anything, will end up being the key to Ukraine winning its fight against Russia. September 29 represented another $10 million down the drain in a war that the US claimed had cost Russia over $200 billion by December 2024, and will have cost many billions more since then. It's all money being extracted from Putin's depleting war chest, and that, more so than the physical act of losing an Mi-8 and several personnel, may be what hurts Russia the most. Now, Russia has expended far too many of its resources in Ukraine. That's not just a problem when it comes to the war itself. Chaos awaits Putin and his cronies after the Ukraine war ends because of Russia's Ukraine war tunnel vision. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show to see more coverage of Ukraine's latest drone strikes against Russia.